Welcome to Sands of Time, where history comes alive. After Adam and Eve were sent out of Eden, their children began a new life in a harsh and changing world. There were no gardens of ease, no shelter from storms. Food had to be found, water had to be carried. The land gave little without hard work. As generations passed, people multiplied. Small groups began to compete for space and resources. In some regions, drought dried rivers. In others, wild animals made life unsafe. Climate shifts made survival harder. Hunting grounds moved. Forests thinned. Rain became rare. To survive, people had to move. Step by step, they followed rivers, chased herds, and searched for better land. This was not a single journey, but the start of many. Over thousands of years, human feet would walk across continents. The memory of Eden faded, but the need to keep going remained. This is the story of that great journey, how humanity spread out and began to fill the earth. The journey of humanity began in Africa. According to science and tradition alike, this is where the first humans lived after Eden. Early human groups settled near rivers, forests, and grasslands. These areas gave them food, water, and shelter. They hunted antelope and wild cattle. They gathered roots, fruits, and nuts. They made tools from stone and wood. As time passed, more families were born. Groups grew larger. Camps became crowded. Resources became harder to find. Some animals moved away. Rain patterns changed. Land that once fed many could no longer support them. So some groups packed their belongings and moved on. Not far at first, just over the next hill or toward the next water source. This early movement took humans deeper into Africa. Some moved west toward forested lands. Others went south into open plains. In the east, people followed the Nile and other rivers. They adapted to new places. They learned new ways to hunt and build. In drier areas, they stored water in skins. In forests, they shaped bows and arrows for hunting. Even within Africa, early humans began to look different. Some groups lived in warm, sunny regions. Others adapted to cooler or wetter climates. Skin tone, body shape, and facial features slowly adjusted to their environments. But all shared common tools and habits: fire, shelter, and the hunt. This chapter of migration happened slowly over thousands of years. It was not a mass movement, but a steady flow of footsteps. People went where life could continue. They carried stories, skills, and memories of the past. Africa was not a place people left quickly. It was the first home, a vast and diverse land that shaped the early chapters of humanity. From Africa, the next major step in human migration was into Asia. This journey likely began around 70,000 years ago. Early humans moved northeast, crossing what is now the Red Sea or the Sinai Peninsula. They entered the Arabian Peninsula, a dry but passable region with seasonal rivers and scatter game. The journey was not rushed. Small groups traveled slowly, following water sources and herds of animals. They hugged the coastlines, where fish and shellfish were plentiful. This coastal route helped them survive in unfamiliar land. From Arabia, they moved into today's Iran and Pakistan. These lands offered rivers, open plains, and forests. The people adjusted quickly. They hunted local animals and gathered wild grains. They began to shape sharper tools and use fire more effectively. They settled in temporary camps, moving season by season. As they reached India, the climate grew warmer and wetter. Rivers like the Indus supported life. People began to stay longer in one place. Some formed early patterns of movement, returning to the same areas each year for hunting and gathering. In Southeast Asia, humans faced thick jungles and heavy rains. They adapted by building simple rafts, using bamboo and wood to float across rivers. These early rafts may have carried them along riverbanks and even to nearby islands. Over time, they reached far lands like Malaysia and Indonesia. Crossing into Asia was not just about movement, it was about change. New tools, new foods, and new environments shaped each group. Slowly, languages and customs began to shift. Though thousands of miles from Africa, these early migrants still shared the same roots. Their steps into Asia were quiet but steady. With each new path, they carried the story of humanity farther across the earth. From Southeast Asia, early humans began one of their most daring migrations. Around 50,000 years ago, small groups traveled farther south, toward the open seas. They reached the islands of Indonesia, Sumatra, Java, and others. These lands were rich with forests, rivers, and animals. People hunted, gathered, and learned to live in the tropical environment. But some looked beyond the sea. A new land waited across the water, one no human had ever seen. That land was Australia. To reach it, people had to cross deep ocean channels. The journey was not easy. They built simple boats from logs, bamboo, and vines. Some may have tied rafts together and used paddles or watched the stars to guide them. These were the first sea voyages in human history. When they arrived in northern Australia, they found strange and giant animals, kangaroos, giant flightless birds, and massive lizards. The land was dry, with wide open plains and forests. Early settlers had to adapt quickly. They learned to track animals over long distances. They hunted with spears and later developed tools like the boomerang. They also built shelters from branches and bark. Fire became essential for cooking and warmth. Water was found in rivers, billabongs, and by digging into the earth, people moved in small groups always connected to the land. Over time, they spread across the continent. They painted on rock walls and carved symbols into stone. These images show animals, people, and stories. This may be the oldest surviving tradition of art and culture in the world. The journey to Australia marked a major step in human history. It showed that early humans were explorers, brave, smart, and ready to enter the unknown. After spreading across the Middle East and parts of Asia, early humans began moving toward a new frontier, Europe. This journey began from the regions of the Levant in the eastern Mediterranean and from areas of Western Asia. These lands served as gateways into the vast and colder lands of Europe. The migration into Europe happened around 45,000 years ago. It was not one large movement, but slow steps taken over generations. Families moved through the Anatolian region, modern-day Turkey, and crossed into southeastern Europe. Others followed river valleys through the Caucasus Mountains or crossed the Balkans. The climate in Europe was colder. Ice covered much of the northern land, but southern areas had forests, rivers, and wild animals. Early humans followed herds of deer, bison, and mammoths. They made camps near caves and water sources. These places offered safety and shelter from the cold. In Europe, humans developed new ways to survive. They made warmer clothing from animal hides. They built stronger shelters using stones, wood, and earth. Fire became even more important. It gave heat and helped them survive long winters. They also improved their tools, making thinner blades from flint, carving handles, and creating fine spear tips. In caves like those in France and Spain, they painted animals on the walls, possibly as part of rituals or storytelling. These first Europeans were part of the same human family that had left Africa. They adapted to the cold and changed with time. Some mixed with an older human species, the Neanderthals, who already lived in Europe. From this meeting, new knowledge and even new traits may have passed on. The journey into Europe was a new chapter of challenge, adaptation, and creativity. The last great human migration led into a vast and unknown world, the Americas. This journey happened much later than others. Most researchers believe it began around 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, during the last ice age. At that time, sea levels were lower. A natural land bridge connected Siberia in Asia to Alaska in North America. This bridge is known as Beringia. It was a cold, treeless plain, but herds of animals crossed it: mammoths, bison, and deer. Small bands of humans followed them, walking across from Asia into a new continent. The first people in the Americas were hunters and gatherers. They used stone-tipped spears to hunt big animals. They made shelters from hides and bones. They warmed themselves with fire and wore thick furs to survive the cold. For many generations, they stayed in the north. But as the ice began to melt, new paths opened. People spread south through mountain passes, valleys, and along the Pacific coast. They followed rivers, hunted new animals, and gathered unfamiliar plants. Slowly, humans reached all parts of the Americas. Some moved into forests and plains. Others crossed deserts and climbed high mountains. They adapted to jungles in Central America and icy regions in the far south of South America. Everywhere they went, they left signs of life: tools, footprints, fire pits, and even early cave art. Over time, different groups developed unique languages, traditions, and skills. The discovery of the Americas by early humans was not done with maps or ships. It was a slow walk into the unknown. But it showed once again the strength of the human spirit: curious, brave, and always moving forward. As the great human migration continued, one vital frontier remained: the scattered islands of the vast Pacific Ocean. These lands, isolated by thousands of kilometers of open water, were among the last places on Earth to be reached by humans. And yet, somehow, they were reached. After settling in Southeast Asia and Papua New Guinea, small groups of early seafarers began exploring farther into the Pacific. Around 3,000 years ago, the first Austronesian-speaking people left Taiwan and the Philippines in large canoes. They used stars, ocean currents, bird patterns, and the color of the sea to guide their way. Long before compasses or maps, they reached islands like Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, building new communities on shores no one had ever touched before. These migrations took planning, teamwork, and incredible courage. People brought plants, animals, tools, and stories across the water. Each canoe carried not just passengers, but a whole way of life. Over centuries, these voyagers expanded their reach. They crossed thousands of miles to reach Hawaii, Easter Island, Rapa Nui, and finally New Zealand, forming what we now call Polynesia. These islands were small, volcanic, and often harsh, but people adapted. They built homes from palm leaves, fished with bone hooks, and carved massive stone statues to honor ancestors and gods. In places like Micronesia and Melanesia, early navigators developed unique boat designs, outrigger canoes, and double-hulled vessels that can survive high waves and strong winds. They memorized wave patterns and the movement of clouds. Navigation was passed down by oral tradition, taught only to those chosen to lead. What makes these journeys so remarkable is not just the distance, but the precision. Pacific navigators reached tiny islands across thousands of kilometers of open ocean without losing their way. Their success stands as one of the greatest achievements in human exploration. With this, the migration was nearly complete. Humanity had spread to every habitable continent and many of the most remote islands on Earth. The Pacific voyages marked the final chapter of the Great Migration, proof of human adaptability, bravery, and the desire to seek out the unknown. As early humans settled across continents, their daily lives began to take shape. No longer just wandering for food, they started building routines, ways of doing things that would one day grow into culture. In different regions, people developed their own tools. In forests, they carved wooden spears and stone axes. In dry areas, they shaped flint and used bones to make sharp blades. These tools weren't just practical, they became part of identity. Over time, each group passed down unique designs, techniques, and styles. People began decorating objects. They painted stones, carved animal bones, and made simple beads from shells or seeds. These decorations had meaning. Some marked belonging. Others may have been signs of status or belief. Music also appeared. In caves and campsites, archaeologists have found flutes made from bird bones and simple drums from hollowed wood. People sang, clapped, and played rhythms around fires. Music helped them celebrate, mourn, and remember. Language evolved too. Each group developed its own words, sounds, and gestures. As families grew apart and moved farther, new dialects formed. These languages allowed them to teach, plan hunts, and tell stories about the past. Even beliefs began to form. Some people buried the dead with care. Others made small figurines or painted animals on cave walls. These acts suggest people were thinking beyond survival, thinking about meaning, memory, and the unseen. These early patterns, tools, art, music, language, belief, were the seeds of culture. They were small, simple, and scattered, but they laid the foundation for everything that would come next. Before writing, before cities, before kings, there was culture, quietly growing, passed hand to hand, across campfires and landscapes, shaping the human journey. After tens of thousands of years of migration, humanity had reached every corner of the earth. From the savannas of Africa to the mountains of Central Asia, from the islands of the Pacific to the icy plains of the North, humans had become a global species. Each region shaped its people. In the forests of Europe, they tracked deer and carved tools from antlers. In the deserts of Arabia, they moved with the shade and followed water. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, they built homes from bamboo and learned the seasons of monsoons. In the Arctic, they hunted seals and built shelters from snow and bone. People now spoke different languages. They wore different clothes. They believed in different spirits and told different stories. But they all shared the same origins. They all carried the memory of an ancient journey, from a single homeland to a wide, wild world. These scattered groups were not yet civilizations. They had no kings or cities, but they were organized. They had leaders, hunters, healers, and storytellers. They raised children, honored the dead, and remembered the past. Their daily lives formed the roots of society. Humans had adapted to every climate, every landscape. They crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and sailed across oceans. They survived droughts, ice ages, and wild predators. Through it all, they remained connected by blood, by memory, and by the long path of migration. By this time, the Earth was not just filled with people, it was filled with peoples. Each group had its own way of life. This was the beginning of human diversity on a global scale. From one origin came many homes, many faces, and many stories. Humanity had become a planet of peoples. From a single origin, humanity spread across the globe. Step by step, early humans crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and sailed unknown seas. They built shelters, shared stories, and planted the first seeds of culture. Along the way, they adapted to heat, cold, hunger, and change, becoming many peoples with one beginning. By the end of the Great Migration, the world was filled with human life. Though they lived apart, their journey was shared. It was not just a movement across land, it was the foundation of everything to come. But before cities, farming, and writing, there was another chapter, longer, quieter, and often forgotten. In the next episode of Sands of Time, Origins, we explore Episode 7, Life Before Civilization, the Hunter-Gatherer Era. Join us as we step into the daily lives of our ancestors, how they hunted, gathered, survived, and shaped the first human societies on Earth.